That night, drenched in blood, Maggie stood in the doorway, her eyes alight with a strange, terrible joy. Her smile, God, that smile, haunts me still. It wasn't the warm, comforting smile I grew up with. No, this one was sharp, unyielding, and spoke of secrets I wasn't ready to face. It was the moment I realized Maggie wasn't just the heart of our family, she was its curse. For years I ignored the signs, the grip that left bruises, the whispers outside my door, the eerie hum of a tune that didn't belong. She was always so gentle, so loving, or at least that's what I told myself. But deep down, I think I always knew something was wrong. That night, everything changed. That night, I learned the truth. Maggie wasn't the woman I thought she was, and our family wasn't safe. She wasn't just my grandmother, she was our curse, and the storm was only beginning. When I think of my childhood, I think of Maggie. She was the heart of our family, the warmth that held us together. Her house always smelled of cinnamon and sugar, like her famous apple pie was perpetually baking. The walls were lined with photos, a timeline of our lives framed in her careful touch. There was always music in the background, her soft humming blending with the hum of the oven. It felt safe. It felt like home. At night, she'd tuck me in with a gentle touch, pulling the blanket up to my chin like it was a ritual meant to keep the world's shadows at bay. Her voice would whisper lullabies, slow and soothing, her words weaving a cocoon around me. "Sweet dreams, my darling," she'd say, her smile soft and endless. And I'd drift off, thinking nothing could ever touch us while Maggie was here. But looking back, there were moments, tiny cracks in that perfect picture, that I didn't notice then. Or maybe I chose not to. Like the way her smile lingered just a second too long when she thought no one was watching. Or how her humming sometimes felt off. A tune that didn't belong, that made my skin prickle without knowing why. I loved her, adored her, but there was a part of me, a quiet, uncertain part, that didn't always feel at ease in her presence. A part that wondered if there was something beneath her warmth. Something darker. Maggie always said everything she did was out of love. She held my hand tightly crossing the street, reminded me to bundle up in the cold, and called me her little angel when I followed her advice. But sometimes her love felt heavier. Like the time I forgot to call her after school. When I finally walked in the door, she was waiting, her arms crossed. Her smile was there, but it wasn't warm. It was sharp, almost like she was calculating something. "I was worried about you," she said, her fingers brushing my cheek. But her grip on my shoulder lingered, firm enough to leave a faint bruise I didn't notice until later. Then there were the whispers. Late at night, just outside my door. At first I thought it was the wind or maybe the house settling, but the sound was too deliberate, too close. I could never make out the words, just fragments like family and forever. Every time I opened the door, the hallway would be empty. But the air always felt heavier, as though she'd been standing there only moments before. And the rocking chair, it still haunts me. It was old, its wooden arms worn smooth from decades of use, but it always moved. Back and forth, slow and steady, even when there wasn't a breeze to stir it. I asked Maggie about it once. She smiled, patting the chair like an old friend. "The house is just alive, sweetheart. Nothing to be afraid of." But the way her fingers lingered on the wood, the way her eyes stayed on the chair, it felt like she was hiding something. The night before it all began, I stayed late, helping clear the dinner table. When I went to grab the plates in front of her, she placed her hand over mine. Her nails pressed into my skin as she leaned in close. "You're not leaving me," she whispered, her voice calm, almost sweet. "None of you are." Then she let go, her smile returning like nothing had happened. But my hand still tingled where she'd held it, and her words, those words echoed in my mind all night. At the time, I told myself I was imagining things, that Maggie was just worried or protective or maybe even lonely. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Her love wasn't just love, it was controlled, and it was growing stronger with each passing day. That night, the house was quieter than usual, too quiet. Everyone had gone to bed, their doors shut tightly as though trying to block out the growing unease. But I couldn't sleep. Maggie's words from earlier, "You're not leaving me," played on a loop in my mind, twisting themselves into something darker the more I thought about them. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling when I heard it. That humming, soft, slow, and deliberate. The same unfamiliar melody I'd heard her hum before, but this time it felt closer. Too close. My chest tightened as the sound moved down the hallway, each note lingering like it was meant to pull me out of bed. And then the footsteps. Barely audible, but unmistakable. Slow, steady, deliberate. They stopped just outside my door. I held my breath, my heart pounding so loudly I thought she might hear it. The humming continued, softer now, almost like a lullaby meant just for me. My hand hovered over the edge of the blanket, unsure if I should stay hidden or face her. But before I could decide, the humming stopped. For a moment there was only silence. And then her voice. Quiet, calm, and impossibly close. Family is forever. My blood ran cold. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The weight of those words pressed down on me like a vice. When I finally mustered the courage to sit up and look, the hallway was empty. No footsteps, no shadow, just the faint echo of her words lingering in the air, like a warning or a promise. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Because deep down I knew this wasn't just Maggie being Maggie. Something was changing, something was coming, and whatever it was already too late to stop. The air outside the house was heavy, almost suffocating. The flashing red and blue lights painted the walls in chaotic streaks, illuminating the growing crowd of neighbors whispering in horror. Their words blurred into the background. Blood everywhere. I can't believe it. How could she? But I couldn't focus on them. My legs felt weak as I stepped closer, the coppery tang of blood hitting me before I even reached the door. Inside, the house was a nightmare. The kitchen, Maggie's kitchen, the warm heart of her home, was unrecognizable. Blood pooled on the tiled floor, dark and viscous, spreading like ink. Chairs lay overturned, one shattered completely, its jagged pieces scattered like shrapnel. The refrigerator door hung open, its contents spilled onto the floor, as though someone had clawed for it in desperation. And then there was Maggie. She sat in her rocking chair at the edge of the chaos, perfectly still, her posture unnervingly composed. In her hands she clutched a family photo, our family photo, the frame smeared with blood. Her fingers traced its edges, slow and deliberate, as if savoring the moment. When she looked up, her eyes met mine, calm and steady, but her smile was wrong. It wasn't the warm, loving expression I'd known my whole life. This one was sharp, brittle, and chillingly serene. For a moment I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, to run, to demand an explanation, but I was frozen. She tilted her head slightly, studying me like she always had, like I was still that little child who trusted her unconditionally. "They didn't understand," she said softly, her voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. "But now they will." My chest tightened as those words settled over me, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to look away, but her gaze held me there, pinned like prey under a predator's watchful eyes. She didn't blink, didn't falter, just sat there, blood-stained and smiling, as though nothing about this scene was wrong. The officers moved cautiously around her, their faces pale and drawn. When one of them reached out to take the photo from her hands, she didn't resist. She simply let go, folding her hands neatly in her lap as though she were preparing for a family portrait. The calm in her movements, the deliberate control, it made my stomach churn. As the officer stepped back, Maggie's eyes returned to me. Her voice was quieter this time, almost tender. "Family is forever," she whispered, her lips curling into that unnerving smile once more. The world around me seemed to tilt, the weight of her words pressing down like a vice. This wasn't the Maggie I knew, or maybe, just maybe, it was, and I had never truly seen her before. The house had been cordoned off, every room a labyrinth of yellow tape, and forensic technicians combing through years of memories turned into evidence. I stood at the edge of the chaos, watching as they carefully catalogued each item. A blood-stained quilt from the living room, torn pages of old family recipes, and that chair, the rocking chair that never seemed to stop moving. It was all being taken apart, piece by piece, until nothing familiar remained. Then they found the journal. It was small, bound in faded leather, the corners frayed from years of use. One of the detectives flipped it open, his face hardening as he scanned the pages. Without a word, he signaled for his partner, and together they disappeared into the other room, the journal clutched tightly in his hand. My stomach twisted. What was in those pages that could make them move so quickly? What had Maggie been hiding all these years? When they finally let me see it, I understood. Maggie's careful, familiar handwriting filled every page, her words neat and methodical, but chillingly detached. It wasn't just a diary, it was a blueprint. Every action, every choice, every horrifying detail had been planned. She wrote about us, about the family, but not in the way I expected. Her words weren't loving or nostalgic. They were cold, calculated. "They don't see it yet," one entry read, "but I'll show them. I'll remind them what family is supposed to mean." Another one, dated weeks before the incident. "They think they can leave, but they don't understand. Family is forever." The more I read, the tighter my chest became. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act of desperation. This was deliberate. She had been planning it for years, and somehow none of us had noticed, or had we? That thought hit me harder than anything else. Had there been signs, warnings? Could one of us have stopped her? Could one of us have helped her? I tried to push the questions away, but they clung to me, each one heavier than the last. As the investigators combed through the rest of the house, they found more. Letters, notes, fragments of conversations Maggie had written down. But what stood out the most were the names. Names of people I didn't recognize, scrawled in the margins alongside cryptic comments like loyal, untrustworthy, and too curious. It didn't make sense. Who were these people? What did they have to do with Maggie? And then there was the final entry in the journal, dated the night before everything unraveled. "It's time. She'll understand one day. She'll see why it had to be this way. She'll understand one day." Those words played over and over in my mind as I stared at the journal, the pages trembling in my hands. Was she talking about me? Had this all been for me? The idea made me sick, but it also filled me with dread. Because if Maggie wasn't working alone, if someone else had been part of this, then who? Could it have been someone I trusted? Someone I loved? Standing in the middle of her dismantled home, surrounded by strangers digging through the wreckage of our lives, I felt it for the first time. The weight of doubt. Maggie had taken more than lives that night. She had taken our trust, our certainty, and in its place, she left a hollow, echoing question. Could one of us have known? Could one of us have helped her? They brought me into the study, Maggie's private sanctuary, a room we were never allowed to enter as kids. It always seemed ordinary, rows of dusty books, a small desk, and her favorite armchair by the window. But now, under the harsh light of the investigation, it was anything but ordinary. The officers were focused on a hidden compartment they'd found in the desk, and what they pulled out was enough to make my stomach twist. It was another journal, smaller than the first, its leather cover cracked and worn. The lead detective handed it to me, his expression unreadable. I hesitated before opening it, my fingers trembling against the fragile pages. Inside, Maggie's handwriting was as precise and deliberate as ever, but these words, they felt heavier, darker. They never understood, one page read. They forgot what family means, what sacrifices must be made. But she will. She'll see why it had to be this way. I felt the room closing in as I turned to another entry, this one dated months earlier. It's not their fault. They've forgotten. But I'll remind them. I'll protect her. She'll understand one day. Protect her? Who was she talking about? And then it hit me like a punch to the chest. It wasn't a stranger. It was me. Maggie had done all of this for me, or so she believed. But the entries didn't stop there. The further I read, the more chilling they became. There were lists, names I didn't recognize, marked with cryptic notes like trusted, doubtful, and necessary. There were sketches of our family tree with certain branches circled and underlined. And then at the very end, a single scrawled sentence that sent a chill down my spine. She's ready now. I stared at the words, my breath catching in my throat. What did she mean? Ready for what? My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer, each one more terrifying than the last. And then I noticed it, an envelope tucked into the back cover of the journal, my name written on it in Maggie's unmistakable script. The officers stepped closer, their eyes on me, but I couldn't wait. My hands shook as I tore it open, the paper inside crackling under my touch. Her message was short, just a few lines, but every word landed like a hammer. My darling, I did this for you. You'll understand soon. It's in your blood. Family is forever. My blood. The words echoed in my head, twisting themselves into shapes I didn't recognize. What did she mean? What was in my blood? I looked up at the detectives, their faces pale and drawn, but no one said anything. No one knew what to say. Because this wasn't just about Maggie anymore. It was about me. It had always been about me. And in that moment, standing in the wreckage of her secrets, I realized the truth. Maggie's story wasn't over. It was just beginning. And somehow, I was at the center of it. The courtroom was cold, sterile, nothing like the warmth of Maggie's house. Yet somehow, the air was just as heavy, thick with the weight of what had been done. Rows of strangers filled the gallery, their faces grim and curious, as if they had come to witness the unraveling of a family they'd only heard about in whispers. I sat near the front, my hands clenched tightly together in my lap. The prosecutor stood tall, his voice sharp and cutting as he laid out the case against her. Piece by piece, Maggie's carefully constructed façade was stripped away, each revelation another blow. One by one, the witnesses took the stand. Family members, neighbors, even old friends, all with stories that painted a picture of a woman I barely recognized. They spoke of her control, her quiet manipulations, the way she always seemed to have a hand in everyone's decisions. She was persuasive. One neighbor said, her voice trembling, "You didn't question her. You just did what she said, and you didn't know why." But it wasn't just manipulation. The prosecutor delved deeper, reading passages from Maggie's journals aloud. Hearing her words spoken in that cold, impersonal voice made my stomach churn. "Family must be guided," one entry read. "They won't always understand, but that's why I'm here, to remind them, to protect them." Each word felt like a knife. I wanted to look away, to shut my ears and pretend it wasn't real, but I couldn't. How could I? This was Maggie, the woman who raised me, who loved me, and now I was being asked to see her as a monster. How could I hate her? How could I reconcile the warmth of her smile with the coldness of her actions? The prosecutor continued, his voice unrelenting. "She wrote about you," he said, turning to me briefly before returning to the jury, "about her plans, her sacrifices." I froze as he flipped to another page, reading it aloud. "She doesn't see it yet," Maggie had written, "but she will. One day she'll thank me. Family is forever." I felt the eyes of the courtroom shift to me, their judgment cutting through the air. I wanted to disappear, to escape the weight of those words, but there was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. And then it was Maggie's turn to speak. She rose slowly from her seat, her hands calm and steady, as though she were unfazed by the weight of the accusations. Her eyes scanned the room, landing on me for just a moment before moving on. When she spoke, her voice was soft, almost tender, but there was a steel edge beneath it. "You've all misunderstood," she said, her lips curling into that same unnerving smile. "What I did for them, for all of you. Family is everything. It's forever, even in death." Her words echoed in the silence that followed, hanging in the air like smoke. The jury shifted uncomfortably, the prosecutor's expression tightened. But Maggie just sat back down, her composure unbroken, her smile unwavering. And as the gavel struck, signaling the end of the trial, I realized something that chilled me to my core. Maggie didn't regret a thing. She never would. To her, this wasn't the end. It was just another chapter in a story she believed would never truly be over. After the trial, nothing felt the same. Our family, once bound by shared history and love, had become a fragmented shell. No one looked at each other the way they used to. Every glance carried suspicion. Every word seemed weighted with unspoken questions. The things Maggie had written in her journals, the names she'd scrawled in the margins, none of us could shake the feeling that someone else might have been involved. But who? At family gatherings, the tension was unbearable. Conversations felt stilted, forced, as though we were all carefully avoiding the elephant in the room. My uncle refused to meet anyone's eyes, fidgeting with his watch whenever Maggie's name was mentioned. My aunt, once the loudest voice at the table, had grown quiet and withdrawn. Even my siblings weren't immune. They whispered to each other late at night, their voices carrying through the walls, though I could never quite make out what they were saying. I tried to push the doubts away, to remind myself that Maggie had acted alone, but the evidence refused to let me. Her journal haunted me. The names, the cryptic notes, the chilling references to loyalty and betrayal. Every entry seemed to point to someone else, some unseen force working alongside her. And then there were her words during the trial. Family is forever, even in death. It was hard not to wonder if she meant more than just a philosophy. Maybe it was a warning. I was beginning to lose sleep, the weight of it all pressing down on me like a lead blanket. It wasn't just the fear that someone else might have helped her. It was the possibility that they might still be out there, watching, waiting. I tried to convince myself that I was being paranoid, but the feeling wouldn't go away. It was always there, just under the surface. And then I found the letter. It was hidden in the back of her journal, folded neatly, my name written on it in her delicate, familiar handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it, the paper crackling softly in the silence of my room. Her words were short, but they hit like a thunderclap. My darling, I know you have questions. You'll know where to look. Family is forever. I read those words over and over, searching for answers in the spaces between them. But there was nothing, just that maddeningly cryptic line. You'll know where to look. Where? Was she talking about the journal? The house? Something else entirely? The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. And yet, I couldn't ignore the feeling that she'd left me a trail, some final game meant just for me. I folded the letter carefully, tucking it back into the journal. My mind was racing, but one thing was clear. Maggie's story wasn't over, and somehow I was now a part of it, whether I wanted to be or not. I told myself it was just a house, wood, bricks, and memories, nothing more. But as I stood at the edge of the driveway, staring at Maggie's home for the first time since the trial, it felt alive. The windows were dark, the curtains drawn, but I could feel its eyes on me, watching, waiting. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of rain and decay, and the wind whispered through the trees like it was carrying her voice. I stepped inside, and the door creaked as if the house itself was exhaling after holding its breath for too long. The familiar smell of cinnamon was gone, replaced by something mustier, colder. The floorboards groaned under my weight, and every step felt like it echoed through the walls. My eyes scanned the living room, now bare of the warmth that once defined it. The rocking chair was there, motionless in the corner, but I couldn't bring myself to look at it for too long. It felt wrong, like it was waiting for something or someone. I made my way to the study, the room where they had found the journal. It was untouched, everything exactly as it had been that night. But this time I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A chest tucked beneath the desk, its surface scratched and scarred with age. The lock was rusted, but it wasn't strong. With a sharp tug, it gave way, and the lid creaked open, revealing its secrets. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, faded and yellowed with time. They were family photos, but not ones I recognized. Faces stared back at me, their expressions blank, their eyes hollow. In some, the people were laughing, but it didn't reach their eyes. And then there were the notes, slips of paper tucked between the photos, scrawled in Maggie's handwriting. Trusted, doubtful, too close. Each word sent a chill down my spine. At the bottom of the chest, there was something else. A small wooden box, its hinges squeaking as I opened it. Inside was a bundle of letters, bound with a frayed ribbon. The handwriting on the envelopes wasn't Maggie's, but it was familiar. Too familiar. I ran my fingers over the names on each letter, my heart sinking as I recognized them. These were people I knew, family members, neighbors, even friends. But why were their names here? And what did Maggie mean by the notes scribbled on the back of each one? The air around me felt heavier, oppressive, as though the house itself was trying to suffocate me. And then I heard it. Faint at first, barely audible, but unmistakable. Humming. That same melody Maggie always hummed, the one that didn't belong. My breath caught in my throat as I looked around, but there was no one there. The sound wasn't coming from the hallway or the rooms upstairs. It was coming from the walls. I pressed my ear to the plaster, my hands trembling as the tune grew louder, clearer. It wasn't just humming, it was her voice, soft, deliberate, and chillingly familiar. Family is forever, she sang, the words carrying through the walls like a ghostly echo. I stumbled back, my pulse pounding in my ears, and for a moment I thought I saw something, a shadow in the corner of my eye. The rocking chair moved, just slightly, its slow creak cutting through the silence. I wanted to leave, to run and never come back, but my feet wouldn't move. The house held me there, like it was pulling me deeper into its secrets. And as the humming faded, replaced by an unbearable silence, I knew one thing for certain. Maggie's grip on this house and on me was far from over. I sat in the center of Maggie's study, surrounded by the remnants of her life, trying to piece together a puzzle that refused to make sense. The photographs, the notes, the letters, they painted a picture of someone I didn't know, someone who had lived a life in shadows. But it wasn't until I found the envelope tucked at the bottom of the chest that everything began to unravel. It was old, the edges yellowed and brittle, with my name written in bold, deliberate letters. My hands shook as I opened it, revealing a single photograph. At first, I thought it was of me, a child, maybe 8 or 9 years old, standing in a garden I didn't recognize. But the longer I stared, the more I realized something was wrong. The hair was the same, the eyes, but the clothes, the setting, it wasn't me. It couldn't be me. The back of the photo was marked with Maggie's handwriting. Legacy. The word felt heavy, like it carried a weight I wasn't ready to bear. I flipped through the journal pages again, this time focusing on the entries I'd skipped before. The word legacy appeared over and over, always tied to the same idea. Bloodlines, inheritance, duty. But what did it mean? And why was this child, the one who looked so much like me, at the center of it all? The journal grew darker as I read on, the language more frantic, more unhinged. Maggie wrote of a duty she had been given, a responsibility to protect the family's line at all costs. She mentioned others, people I didn't recognize, their names scrawled hastily in the margins. The circle must remain unbroken, one entry read. They understand what's at stake. Another simply said, the sacrifice will not be in vain. Sacrifice, the word made my stomach turn. And then there was the sketch, crudely drawn but unmistakable. It was a tree, branches sprawling with names written along each one. Our family tree. Except it wasn't just our family. There were others, names I didn't recognize, all connected to ours like vines twisting and coiling around the trunk. Besides some of the names, Maggie had drawn symbols. Circles, crosses, stars. I didn't know what they meant, but I knew they weren't random. This wasn't just about family. It was something bigger, something deeper, something sinister. As I read on, the pieces began to fall into place. Maggie hadn't been working alone. She was part of something, some network, some group that believed in these twisted ideas of bloodlines and legacy. Her journal was full of references to meetings, to letters exchanged, to whispers of others who understood the importance of preservation. And then there was the name. One name that appeared more than any other. Evelyn. I didn't know who she was, but Maggie wrote about her like a confidante, someone she trusted implicitly, someone who had helped her. Evelyn will know what to do, one entry read. She always does. She'll guide her when the time comes. Guide who? Me? The thought made my skin crawl. Was Evelyn still out there? Was she watching, waiting? The air in the room felt heavier, suffocating, as if the walls themselves were pressing in. The shadows seemed to stretch and shift, and for a moment I thought I heard it again, the humming. Faint, almost imperceptible, but there. I closed the journal, my hands trembling, and took the photo with me. I couldn't stay in that house any longer, but as I left, one thing was clear. Maggie's secrets weren't buried with her. They were alive, tangled in the lives of others, and I was the key to uncovering them. I thought leaving the house would give me some relief, some distance from Maggie's shadow, but it didn't. Her presence lingered like a cold wind that followed me wherever I went. At night, I would lie awake, the journal and the photograph tucked under my bed, as if keeping them close might hold her secrets at bay. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't. And then the letter came. It arrived in a plain envelope, no return address, just my name written in a handwriting I knew too well. Maggie's handwriting. My breath caught as I opened it, the paper trembling in my hands. It was short, only a few lines, but every word struck like a hammer. My darling, I told you you'd understand one day. It's all in the blood. Family is forever. My stomach turned as I read the words again, searching for meaning in their simplicity. She was in prison. She couldn't have sent this. But there it was, as real as the air I was struggling to breathe. The paper smelled faintly of her perfume, lavender and something sharp, metallic, like it had been dipped in her essence. It was impossible, but I couldn't deny it. The house had stayed empty since I left it, but that night, something compelled me to go back. I told myself I just needed to confirm it was still locked, that no one had been inside. But as I stood at the edge of the driveway, staring at its dark silhouette, I felt the pull again. That magnetic, suffocating force drawing me in. The door creaked as I stepped inside, the air thicker than before, almost choking. The house was silent, but not empty. It felt alive, watching, waiting. I made my way to the living room, my footsteps slow and deliberate, the floorboards groaning under my weight. And then I saw it, the rocking chair. It was moving, its creak sharp and rhythmic, cutting through the silence like a knife. My chest tightened as I froze in place, my eyes locked on the chair as it rocked forward, then back, as though someone were sitting there unseen. And then I heard it. Her voice, soft, calm, but unmistakably Maggie's. "I told you, my darling, we'll always be together." The room spun, my pulse pounding in my ears. I stumbled back, my gaze darting around the room, but it was empty. The voice was gone, the chair was still, but the weight of her words stayed, heavy and unrelenting. I ran, slamming the door behind me, but even as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still there, that she would always be there. Because Maggie was right. Family is forever, and no matter how far I ran, I knew I could never escape her.
Hey, before you go, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Join our amazing community and stay connected with fresh content every single day. It's free, it's easy, and it guarantees you'll never miss out on the stories, insights, and adventures we share. So go ahead, click subscribe, and let's make every day unforgettable together.